Another really important part of the body of your speech are the pieces that keep the speech moving. And here we're talking about things like transitions, internal previews, internal summaries, and signposts. First, with transitions, these are sentences in your speech that indicate that a speaker is moving from one point to another. It would happen in between your introduction and your first main point, your first main point and your second main point, and your second main point and your third main point. And generally speaking, you use language such as, now that we've talked about this, let's talk about that. Now that we've talked about how ibuprofen and aspirin are similar, let's talk about how they're different. That sort of thing. And it really helps your audience to just keep track of where you are in the speech. It reminds them of, okay, we've talked about this part of the speech already, and now it makes sense that we're moving on to this part. So it helps them keep track, it helps them to remain interested in the speech because it's something new, it's a change, so they pay a little bit more attention when you're transitioning. And it also helps you to remember where you are in your speech as well. Internal previews give the audience an idea of what's to come. So typically we use an internal preview when a main point is going to be particularly complex or convoluted, and it might be a little bit difficult for your audience to follow along within that main point. So before you launch into the main point, you let them know what you're about to talk about. You say that we are first going to talk about this part, then that part of this topic. So it just kind of gives the audience a sneak preview of what's going to happen in that main point so that they know exactly what to expect. Internal summaries, on the other hand, remind the audience of what they've just heard. And so these happen at the end of a main point and remind the audience of what was just talked about in that main point. It's the part in your speech where you go, in summary, or in a sentence, and you just quickly remind the audience of what was in that main point, and you break it down so it's nice and simple for them to understand and remember. Now, you aren't always going to be using internal previews and internal summaries. These are only really used when a main point is particularly complicated for the audience to understand, and you think that they'll need the extra help in order to remember or understand what it is that you're talking about. So you probably are only going to use one at a time, and it's not going to be used in every single speech. It really just depends on your topic and your main points, whether or not you use internal previews and internal summaries. Finally, we also use signposts. And signposts simply help the audience to keep track of where you are in the speech. It's when you use language like first, next, and finally, or first, second, third, that sort of thing. And it really just helps the audience to pinpoint where we are in the speech. Generally speaking, you'll use signposts when you use transitions and when you use internal previews and internal summaries. So for your speeches, I am absolutely expecting that you have transitions and signposts to help your audience follow along, but the internal previews and internal summaries completely depend on the topic that you choose. So you may or may not use those. But transitions and signposts, absolutely you're going to use them throughout the speech, after your introduction, between each of your main points, etc. And if you look at the sample outline that I provided for you on that template outline, you'll see the places where you should be inserting those transitions. And I've laid it out nice and easy so you can just plug in whatever transition it is that you need in that spot and just make sure that you hit all of the transitions that are needed in that speech to make sure that everything just keeps moving for the audience.